If there's one person who has always been a disappointment to this family, it's Margaret, my daughter-in-law Vanessa said as she raised her glass at our annual family reunion. A few nervous laughs drifted across the room. Some people looked away. Others stared at their plates. My son Marcus sat beside her and said nothing. At 71 years old, I had spent decades putting this family before myself. Yet in that moment I felt like a stranger at my own table. I smiled politely and took a sip of iced tea. What hurt most wasn't Vanessa's words. It was the silence that followed. The drive home felt longer than the 40 miles it usually took. The late afternoon sun stretched across the highway, painting everything in shades of gold, but I barely noticed. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as Vanessa's words echoed in my mind. When I reached my house, the silence greeted me like an old friend. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and looked at the framed photograph of my late husband, Robert. He had always believed family was something you protected. Standing there alone, I began to wonder when my own family had stopped protecting me and started pushing me away. That night I could not sleep. I sat in my living room with only a small lamp glowing beside Robert's favorite chair. As the hours passed, memories began lining up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle. The Christmas dinner where Vanessa claimed there was not enough room for me. The birthday party invitation that arrived after the celebration had already ended. The weekend trips Marcus never mentioned until they were over. At the time, each excuse sounded reasonable. Sitting there alone, I finally saw the pattern. None of it had been accidental. Someone had been quietly rewriting my place in the family for years. 3 days later, my granddaughter Olivia called and asked if she could stop by. There was something unusual in her voice. That afternoon we sat at my kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between us. She stared into her mug for a long moment before speaking. Finally she said, "Grandma, I do not think you know what people have been told about you." My stomach tightened. Olivia explained that for years Vanessa had painted a very different picture of me to relatives and friends. Not loud lies. Small stories. Careful comments. Just enough to make everyone question who I really was. Olivia reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She showed me messages, screenshots, and comments that stretched back years. There it was in black and white. Vanessa telling relatives I was controlling. Vanessa claiming I complained about everyone behind their backs. Vanessa suggesting I made Marcus feel guilty whenever he visited me. None of it was true, yet each story sounded believable enough to spread. I sat quietly and looked through every message. Then Olivia said something that changed everything. "Grandma, I do not think this was ever about family. I think she was afraid you would discover something else." After Olivia left, I sat at the table long after the coffee had gone cold. Her words stayed with me. Afraid of what I might discover. The next morning I called James Carter, the attorney who had handled several family matters over the years. We met for lunch at a small restaurant downtown. As we talked, he mentioned a few financial decisions that had surprised him in recent years. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just choices that seemed unusual. For the first time, I began looking beyond the hurt feelings and family gossip. A larger picture was starting to emerge, and I could not ignore it any longer. Over the next week, I reviewed old emails, family records, and notes I had saved without much thought. Patterns began appearing where I had once seen coincidence. Certain decisions always seemed to benefit Vanessa. Important conversations somehow happened when I was not included. Invitations changed. Plans shifted. Narratives spread. The more I looked, the less random it felt. Then Olivia called again with unexpected news. Another family gathering had been scheduled for the following month. Nearly everyone would be there. As I listened, I glanced at the folder growing on my dining room table. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. The gathering was held at a lakeside community center on a bright Saturday afternoon. Families chatted, children ran across the grass, and folding tables overflowed with food. I arrived carrying nothing more than a small folder and a quiet sense of certainty. Vanessa greeted people with her usual confidence, moving from group to group as though she controlled the room. I smiled, took a seat, and listened. As the conversations unfolded, a few relatives began asking questions they had never asked before. For the first time, the stories about me were no longer being accepted without hesitation, and Vanessa noticed it immediately. By the end of the afternoon, the room felt different. People were listening instead of assuming. Marcus finally looked at me, not through me. I never raised my voice. I never demanded an apology. I simply allowed the truth to stand on its own. Sometimes everything changes the moment people stop believing a story and start paying attention to the facts.